Hello, this is a, a video about a game that I was working on years ago. It's mostly for archival purposes and just my own benefit. This game was never finished, it never will be finished, and it's probably going to get lost one day due to hard drive failure. It's been sitting on an old external hard drive for years already. It's also why it's a bit slow to load. It's loading off a physical external drive. It was a game that I made using Cryengine 3.5, which came out in 2013. It was a very difficult engine to use. It wasn't very well documented. Um, it was very restrictive in the formats of files you could import. You pretty much could only import files which had been processed using Crytek's own tools. So for example, for modeling, they only supported 3D Studio Max and Maya, which are really expensive programs to use for say an indie developer. And even the textures, you had to import, you had to process them, convert them first using Crytek's own programs. They had to be in really specific formats and so forth. So difficult to work with as far as what importing assets, and very little documentation for the programming side of things. You had a basic visual scripting system in there. I can't remember what their name for it was. It was a node-based scripting system, which is actually what I used to control the enemy logic in this game. Ideally, you would program in C++ for this game. I could never get it to work. You needed to set up the whole project in Visual Studio or whatever to be able to compile the game code, and you pretty much would add your own code in. There was no facilities to add your own code or do anything much code-wise through the game editor. And I could never even get their code to compile, let alone do my own things. And nothing was really documented anyway, so it would have been just a matter of guesswork and trial and error to get anything working. As much as I wanted to use this engine at the time, it was known for being graphically impressive. As far as usability, user-friendliness, and actually making stuff with it, it was pretty bad. They did offer some support. Well, they offered the game, the engine, as a free game engine that anyone could use. But to get any documentation or support for it, you pretty much, what they wanted you to do was to pay a licensing fee to get their support, which, yeah, sort of not realistic for a hobbyist gamer. So lesson learned, pick an engine that's easy to work with rather than one that has a hypothetical feature set that you may not even be able to get the most out of because you can't use the damn thing. The island was created in World Machine, which is a terrain generating program. Pretty much outputs a height map, pretty common for most game engines. Use a height map for your terrain. So I made the island. It's 4 kilometers square. Imported that in. It's quite a large map. I wanted to make something as big as possible because I had this idea of doing a large open world game. That was a mistake as well. Most of the textures I did make myself. I either took photos of terrain, plants, ground, rocks, whatever, at a local park. The rest of them that I didn't take myself were, from free texture websites and stuff like that, which I then edit them. I just often find textures which weren't tileable and make them tileable. It was a lot of work, particularly getting bump maps, specular maps, normal maps, all had to be generated from the color data or the albedo map, which is the wrong way to do it, but it's good enough for what I did at the time. The textures are distributed procedurally based on the height of the terrain and the steepness of the terrain. So, for example, the lower the terrain is, that is to say the closer to sea level it is, it'll do these sand type textures. So as you get closer and closer to sea level, it starts putting sand in. Then as you go up the mountains, it'll start doing grass and rocks and so forth. So that's the height-based component of the texture distribution. Then you have the angle. So even at low terrain, if it's a steep surface like here, it'll draw rocks instead of grass. So you'll get it transitioning from sand to these pebbles. Then you'll have grass. Then you'll have dirt, and then you'll have rocks based on steepness. So although it's a very large map, it was basically textured procedurally, which is very fast to do. A professional game would have a lot more hand-painted details. There's a lot of things that aren't perfect that you'd want to fix up, but for one person doing it on their own in the bedroom, it's good enough. The vegetation, most of that is custom made as well. It's also placed procedurally using a similar system. So you've got the height of the terrain. Closer down to the sea, you'll get the palm tree types, and the further up you go, you'll get these types of trees, and then you've got also the slope-based distribution as well. So if it's flat ground, it's going to do grasses. The steeper it gets, also the large trees will only grow on flat ground. You'll get some certain types of bushes will grow on a cliff face, but generally the steeper it gets, the less vegetation you'll get. And then there's just distribution densities for different types of things. Obviously you've got more grass, a medium amount of the smaller bushes, and then only a smaller amount of the really large trees. So the mountain, the terrain is generated procedurally in World Machine. The textures are painted procedurally, and most of the assets are distributed procedurally. Even the rocks, like there's a large clump of rocks here. That's just also there's a chance that it'll spawn a rock on a flattish surface. The rest of the assets, the gun models, the enemies I'm shooting, the player model, they're just default assets that come with the game engine. There's some vehicles, there's a Humvee, and there's a boat. There's a few things that there's some buildings and all that. They're all default assets that come in the game engine as well. I wouldn't want to ship a game or sell it, or probably even give it away with a bunch of default assets. As far as developing a game, obviously you want to get in and get the game working as quickly as possible, so I think it's fine to use what's available to you just to get the game functioning, but I'm not a big fan of using pre-made assets, even some of the store-bought assets and that. There's situations where it's fine to use certain things, but just using big chunks of easily recognizable artwork and models and stuff, I don't think that's... You don't want to just make a game that looks the same as what everybody else can just get from the store or whatever. As far as the design and scope of the game, like I said, I wanted to make a game that's it was like an open world Far Cry kind of thing. Realistically, once I started making it, the easy part was making the island. You know, you can, like I said, make this island, make a bunch of plants, a bunch of rocks, and run around in it and shoot things. But the actual gameplay is very difficult and very time consuming to produce for those types of games. you need a whole bunch of different areas to play in. You need a bunch of quests, you need a storyline, you need cutscenes, you need a whole variety of different enemy models, and all the scripting to make that all work. You know, you want to have interesting missions. You don't just want to be shooting the same looking bunch of guys all over the place. And that's where this whole idea sort of fell apart, particularly with the difficulty of programming with this engine. Even if it was easy, you're looking at a game type that is normally made by a large studio with multi-million-dollar budget and dozens or hundreds of people working on it. And it's just really beyond the scope of what a hobbyist game maker can do. So that's pretty much why this game stopped where it did. It's got the basics of gameplay. There's some nice areas in here. There's some pretty looking areas on the island. There's some, you know, not necessarily well designed, but it looks cool. It looks like it could be a fun game, but there's no actual gameplay. Pretty much all there is there's 50 enemies to shoot, and you've got a timer on your UI. So all you can do is run around and find the 50 guys and shoot them, and just see how fast you can do it. I don't think anybody would have much fun playing this game as it is. Each enemy is standing near a campfire. Once you shoot them, the campfire goes out, so you can use the black smoke from the fires to know which direction to head towards to find an enemy. You can kill them, then their fire goes out, and you can move to the next one. Yeah, that's basically it. Once they go active, as in once they've seen you, because they just path around in a set loop on their own until they either see you or hear you. They'll go active and they'll get that little marker on their head, and that was basically once you engaged in combat with them. If they ran out into the bushes, it was really hard to see. Like, they could run into this foliage here and shoot at you, but you couldn't see them to shoot back, and it felt a bit unfair. So I just put those big obvious markers on their head once they'd become hostile to make it easy to follow them and track them down, even when they were hiding. But yeah, that's basically it. So lesson learned is pick an engine that's easy to use, because being able to actually make a game is more important than how pretty the engine can potentially make it look. And also pick a scope of game which is realistic for your time, and how many years you want to spend working on a game, how many people you have working on it. You can't make an MMORPG on your own. You can't make an open world game like Far Cry or Assassin's Creed or that style of game on your own. Like, you just can't. You're not going to get enough content, of quality content, to compete with those sorts of games. So a shooting game like this would have to be a tight, linear corridor shooter with small levels and tight gameplay, rather than just having an open world, because there's no way you can fill a big open world with enough content for it to be fun for anybody, unless you spent years and years on it, and that's not really practical. But yeah, so that's the time I tried to make an open world shooter game and gave up.